Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. And congratulations to all of you who won something this morning. So at this point, we are going to get straight into the presentation. Oh, yes, Scott. Scott has something for us as well.
Hey, so this is going to be happening before the next time I see any of you, but on March 21st, we're having a period packing supply party with Women for Women Tempe. I believe it's going to be starting at 12:30 or 12. It's on the calendar and it's on Meetup. So it's a great time. Please register for that on Meetup, and it's for a very good cause. Thank you.
Thank you much, Scott. And Scott is part of our service and excuse me, my word is not coming out. So, service and participation team. He's part of the VAST team that comes up with a lot of great ideas, how we can do good in the community for the community. At this point, I'm going to bring up Aaron to introduce our speaker. And one thing I did want to mention is if you could please silence your cell phones, we greatly appreciate that. At the end of the presentation, I will come around with a microphone. Just raise your hand. Please ask one question relevant to the topic, and we will try to share the air, make sure that many people have as many questions as possible so that Carly can never leave. All right, here we go, Aaron.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Good morning, HSGP. Thank you guys for joining us. Okay, this morning I am very excited to present to you another great round with Carly Schorman. Carly, she, her, was raised in a dusty stretch of desert not intended for human habitation. She received her undergraduate degree from ASU before completing a master's degree in philosophy and religion from the California Institute of Integral Studies. She is a published novelist and has also written for a number of publications and podcasts. At present, she is a death care professional and a member of the Society for Business Ethics, chairperson for the Women in Business Council in Tempe, a finalist for the Tempe Chamber of Commerce's Business Woman of the Year, and an active participant in both local business and the arts. She is currently serving as the director for Starlight Memorial Park, a historical stretch of Tempe that is being transformed into a community space using the principles of adaptive reuse and sustainability. Previous speaking engagements include American Academy of Religion Western Conference, the Women's International Peace Conference, and several guest spots on podcasts and radio, including NPR's The Show. Would you please join me in a warm humanist welcome to Carly Schorman.
All right. Hello, hello, hello. Hey! Awesome. Very exciting. Okay. Let's talk about capitalism here. So late capitalism, or late-stage capitalism, is a phase, and some would argue the current phase of capitalism. It's important to understand that capitalism is an economic system. The term was coined by the economist Werner Sombart to describe post-World War I society. So late capitalism isn't anything new. Since its inception back in the 1930s, the term has been used to encapsulate many of the problems found in the capitalist system that we're dealing with. Boop. Okay. But during the mid-20th century, it was often applied in reference to state monopoly capitalism, or STEMCAP. And STEMCAP has to do with Marxist theory. At this stage in capitalism, the state merges with or acts on behalf of giant monopolistic corporations to secure profits, protect them from competition, and manage economic crises. That sounds a little familiar. So that's why we often refer to this point in human history as late-stage capitalism. I think most people will agree, even in this era of heated disagreements, that our government, the American government, acts on behalf or at the behest of giant corporations. In The State and Revolution by Lenin, not that Lenin, he argues that this state monopoly capitalism is the final stage of capitalism. At this point, those who hold the wealth or means of production are protected by the government of the United States. We've all been watching the wealth continue to consolidate at the very top and poverty continue to expand for nearly a century in what is termed late-stage capitalism. One of the core ideas of late capitalism comes to us in the phrase, too big to fail. When it comes to large banks, they are actually called too big to fail, TBTF. When their holdings are so massive, so integrally tied to the American economy, that their collapse could trigger a devastating economic crisis. So big government steps in to save them when they run into trouble. The big four, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo, hold roughly 45% of all domestic consumer bank deposits and represent nearly half of the banking industry's annual profits. Basically, that's $4.6 trillion. And once again, the term is probably older than you think. Too big to fail was first popularized by U.S. Congressman Stuart McKinney in 1984 congressional hearing to discuss the FDIC's intervention with Continental Illinois. So Continental Illinois was a bank, and in 1984 they were facing the largest bank failure in the nation's history. Now, at this point, the FDIC stepped in. And for those who might not know, FDIC stands for Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This is a government agency created in 1933 to protect American citizens' bank deposit accounts. Before this, your bank fails, your money's gone, like we saw during the Great Depression. Banks failed and the American people lost their money. The FDIC was created to safeguard all the regular folks who want to keep their money in the bank rather than like in a mattress. There are limits to how much an individual or individual entities can insure because, once again, it was created to protect citizens and not big business. But as we saw with Continental Illinois and the global financial crisis in 2008, the FDIC protected the banking institutions rather than the deposit account holders. Or, as it was pitched at the time, saving the banks meant saving the economy, which meant saving the citizens. There was this middle place, the financial institutions, who are receiving the government support rather than the individuals who hold accounts with those institutions. And this is where it gets sticky. First of all, under this interpretation, the government is now protecting the financial institutions, not the people. It is the economy that cannot fail. Now, honestly, I could spend the whole time talking about the 2008 financial crisis, but the big takeaway is that the government must protect us from economic collapse when necessary by saving these giant corporations from financial ruin. And sure, it might have helped move us along from a Great Recession into a place of economic recovery. At the same time, folks were able to see some of the implications of the safety net happen in real time. And we quickly learned that large financial bailouts to these corporations often resulted in massive payouts to the people running those institutions who were responsible for getting us into this mess to begin with. The corruption of corporations became very apparent very quickly. And now, 16 years later, we can also see that these large institutions are seemingly incentivized to take more risks because they know the government is there if they fall short. Cool. Now, if we look to the root cause of the 2008 crisis, it actually has more to do with real estate than just bank deposit accounts. So in the 90s, regulations about home loans were relaxed because we were dealing with a housing crisis. And this was the government's solution. It sounds like a good idea. The rules were too rigid for most people to get approved for a home loan. So why don't we just relax some of those rules so that more people can get into a mortgage rather than continuing to pay rent on a property they don't own? Brilliant. Except, once again, we're looking to corporations to enact this plan. As such, they began extending predatory loans at subprime rates, disproportionately to racial minorities, by the way, and created a housing bubble that eventually burst. And, once again, Rather than allowing corporations to fail or make the adjustments needed in order to continue doing business, the government swooped in and saved them. But homeowners across the country ended up bearing the brunt of that crisis when their homes were devalued after being artificially inflated by the banks. So when I say late-stage capitalism, what I mean is that we're at a point beyond traditional capitalism where the system self-regulates. In a traditional capitalistic system, it is the banks and lenders who would have taken the hit for their bad decisions. Really, their unethical and bad decisions. In late-stage capitalism, we see the government act on behalf of a group of corporations or individuals. I think the crux of our conversation here today, however, is how do we change things from within late-stage capitalism into a better economic system, a more ethical economic system, one that doesn't create such vast divides between the have and have-nots. Perhaps even an approach that doesn't place the value strictly on generating as much capital as possible. I think the hows and whys of how we got to this place are important questions, ones that I'm sure will be thoroughly studied by future historians. But one of the most important aspects of my own personal philosophy is that we must always live in accordance with our own ethical beliefs to the extent that it does not infringe upon others. And then we must continually evaluate and reevaluate the effect of our effort. If you're doing something good for the sake of doing something good, but the end results are not taken into account, then you might not actually be doing anything good. Now, don't get me wrong. I love shouting into the void of the internet about the injustices of the world. I have lost my temper and tantrumed on social media, only to delete it later, usually. Posting online is one of the myriad of examples of people who want to do something good, but often end up doing something counterproductive to their cause, all in the name of signaling to others that they are a virtuous person. We see it constantly. The online agitators and keyboard warriors. Because of the nature of the project my husband and I are currently working on, I've had to work a lot with local government. Shout out to Brian. We have a very strange space, and it's a historic place. So sometimes the rules end up being at odds with what is best for our particular situation. And so one of the things I've learned is that there are people who are always readily available online. And then there are those who are out in the community doing the work who are often less recognized. That's because on the internet, the people who are most on the internet usually win at the internet. Okay, so point is, sometimes something on the internet, putting something on the internet is counterproductive to the cause. And at those moments, should we not reevaluate our approach? I promise this all ties back to capitalism. But we are philosophical creatures who reflect on the nature of our own existence. We always have to draw a baseline. As I've said before, I lean into Aristotle and his definition of a good life, which good works and good times. Do good things and enjoy your time here. To me, doing good things in this world also comes with the implicit, don't do bad things either. But that's really what we need to break down to understand how we move beyond late-stage capitalism. I mean, how do you live a good life at this point in human history? I'm sure it seems like we're all on an extinction-level collision course. But I think one of the biggest errors in modern thinking is all or nothing. We struggle to take steps because they are not strides. All right. Take, for example, Jeremy Bearimy from the show The Good Place. For those of you who have not watched the show, may I recommend, but in the immediacy, may I explain. Jeremy Bearimy is a character who had a revelation while under the influence of some very strong hallucinogenics, that all of life comes down to an equation of how much good you're doing in the world versus how much bad you're doing. But in this particular instance, we need to not only look at our actions, but the implications of those actions. Maybe you woke up today and called your mother. That's a good deed in my house. But I called her from my cell phone. this little Apple device I carry around with me absolutely everywhere. And while it might not support the evilest of evil corporations, I know it relies on a lithium battery. I know where that comes from. So at the same time I'm doing good, I'm also doing something bad. How do we weigh these two things against each other to determine if the good merits the bad? Checking in with my aging mother, who's very prone to loneliness these days, rely on a product that contributes to the evils of the world, however abstractly. And honestly, the bad seems unavoidable because of that monopoly part of state monopoly capitalism. What is the alternative? Samsung? Please don't say cricket. Don't say cricket. The 21st century immediately lands us on a slippery slope of concessions when it comes to ethical decision making. This is bad, but not as bad as something else. Jeremy Bearimy shaped every aspect of his life by doing the right thing, keeping the math in his favor so when he dies, he ends up in the good place. His every action is frozen out of a concern for the unintended consequences of that action. How many of us have gotten caught in that same shame spiral, to weigh our reliance on our digital devices against knowledge of where those come from and who's making money from their continued use? It always feels like we're losing the battle for a better tomorrow every time we do something good, because most of our actions can be tied to something bad. Whether by accident or corporate design, it feels like small acts within our reach are ineffectual at best and counterproductive at other times. Everything seems stacked to show us how bad we are at pushing for actual change in the world. It reminds me of recycling. Better for the environment, okay, but are things we toss in recycling bin actually going somewhere other than a landfill? Oftentimes, no. City by city, state by state, all across the country, the things we think get recycled do not actually end up getting recycled. Sometimes they're sent straight to the landfills. Do not pass go. But when people have inquired about this practice, officials have gone in favor of, we're keeping up practice. Like, we'll work out the other part of this whole recycling system, you know, the actual recycling part. We're gonna work it out, but we don't want our good citizens forgetting how to separate their glass and their plastic in the meantime. Recycling, depending on your municipality, might be nothing more than virtue signaling, telling those around you that you are part of the solution, not part of the problem. Okay, we'll go back to that. So, before we can learn how to subvert the narrative, we need to look at some basic truths about human society as we know it. First, in capitalism, we value capital. The acquisition of wealth is the goal. Even in ethical business practices, gaining capital is the defining force. No one starts a business with the goal of losing money. Usually, with ethical business, the goal is to increase profits without sacrificing that ethical part. But profit still matters. The American dream centers on upward mobility, increased access to capital, and the opportunities that wealth brings. Of course, these days, it seems like it's more about the privileges enjoyed by those in possession of disproportionate wealth. I'm gonna grab my water or I'll die. Excuse me. In American capitalism, the money hoarders at the top are revered as exceptional, the ones who fought hardest for their American dream, the innovators and inventors, the movers and shakers. They accomplished what we could not. When capital is the most valued element, we tend to see people who have it as people of value, even if that value system is flawed. Okay. They were just working within the system they were born into. Like the rest of us, they are trying to make the best of a bad situation. And, as we've learned, that often means doing something a little bit bad to accomplish something good, right? Frankly, it's naive to think otherwise. And that's where we get got. That right there is the moment we lose the battle. We accept the idea that capital is value in and of itself. We are fish in the fishbowl, unable to see those confines. Within a capitalistic society, we are conditioned to see the pursuit of wealth as the forgivable endeavor because it's essential not just for thriving, but surviving. If we don't have money, how will we pay for food or housing or dentistry? How will we pay for the things when we're too old to work? We need to save as much as we can to safeguard ourselves. We need to keep money around to help our kids avoid poverty traps. It's not selfish, it's smart. And it really is. Growing up without money certainly taught me the value early in life. It's all well and good to imagine a world where we help each other out and no one has any more than anyone else. But we don't live in that world, and this world requires payments for services rendered. We live in an advanced society in a modern world where we have all these wonders that can help us live our best life. But we're often denied access because we lack the capital to participate in these wonders. People die and children starve because they don't have the resources of a much wealthier but much smaller sect of people. For many of us, especially the people in this room, we feel like we're glitching out when we think about these things because shouldn't it be obvious that this is not the best course for humanity? We're just supposed to accept that this is the way the cookie crumbles because it's a recipe that's been handed down to us? Who does this make sense to? The top 10% in the United States owns roughly 67 to 73% of the total wealth, while the bottom half holds only about 2.5%. According to data released by the Federal Reserve, the top 1% of households account for 30.5% of the country's wealth. 30.5% of the wealth tied up with the top 1%, while the bottom 50% claims 2.5%. Starting in the 80s through today, wealth has become increasingly concentrated amongst these wealthy elites, largely because of corporate stock ownership. And if this seems messed up, that's only because it is totally messed up. And it's not unreasonable to say it. The current state of wealth inequality in the United States is something that just about everyone seems to agree on. According to a study published in 2011, Republicans and rich people agreed wealth inequality is a huge problem. Now, when rich people are complaining that the distribution of wealth is unfair, you really need to ask yourself, who supports this way of doing things? STAMICAP, state monopoly capitalism, late stage capitalism. That's what it comes down to, and that's why we're talking about it today. Now, of course, we've seen some shifts when it comes to the economic powerhouses since 2008. Why? The internet. Once the space for nerds and analysts, this has torn through society, tethering us to a digital shadow that we cannot shake. Before you start thinking I'm going to tell you to delete all your social media accounts, smash up your cell phone, and build an off-grid commune in Iowa, that's not where this conversation is going. Nobody wants to live in Iowa. Okay. I'm a 21st century digital girl. I love the internet. I love memes and Reddit and Instagram Reels, and I'm only mildly embarrassed to admit it. Just a smidge embarrassed, but I'm not going to lie to you folks today. I take inspiration from Emma Goldman on this. Although frequently misquoted, Goldman famously said, "If I can't dance, I don't want to be in your revolution." I don't want to give up on modernity just because it's not working out as we might have hoped. And frankly, I hate camping. I also believe that we as humans are past the point of violence. We have to advance beyond brutality, so don't burn down an Amazon warehouse. That is not the answer. This is about living philosophically, or more accurately, living your philosophy. And I believe in nonviolent confrontation. As I say that, I feel like I also need to mention that there are no absolutes. So if you threaten my husband or my dog, I will fight you. Now, I bring this up because when we look at political or economic shifts in history, particularly shifts from capitalism to other models, These are often very violent events, like Russia or China with the Red Guard or Cuba. When we look at changing the world, we need to examine our options through a nonviolent lens. Human technology has brought us to the point where the devastating effects of war can be unimaginable. I think it's very important that we think in terms of nonviolent revolution, and that looks like reformation. We must pivot and start moving in a different direction. So I want to start a dialogue with you. See, it's not kittens this time, guys. I was going to bring down more kitten slides, but I want to start a dialogue with all of you here and now about how we can change this. A lot of us talk about capitalism. We think about it, we live it, we breathe it. How can we possibly dismantle it? Seriously, how do we turn the beat around? Well, government regulation seems like a good place to start, but we're dealing with STAMICAP. The government is not going to magically change their mind about supporting these large corporations or rejecting their donations. And while I think it's important to keep pushing for changes in the way our government regulates big business, we need to look more at actionable ways we can all ethically engage in a system of late capitalism. So let's take a look at BDS, or Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. This is a Palestinian-led nonviolent organization focused on economic action that was modeled on the AAM, or anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. In fact, the group formed at the 2001 World Conference Against Racism in South Africa. The AAM sought to combat oppression through structured boycotts and other economic actions. In 1994, the AAM became Action for South Africa when they beat apartheid to establish free and fair elections that did not exclude people by race and were determined by majority rule. In capitalism, you have to hit them in the economy. So, BDS worked on targeted economic actions just like they did during the apartheid in South Africa. Has that helped the Palestinians with their demands for fair and humane treatment? No, definitely not. Lots of things are different between these two situations, but I think one of the changes that often gets overlooked is the way people in power have convinced us that nothing we do will impart any change in the world around us. And we're so flooded with information that it's harder to find things that deserve our attention. And then we need to talk about who controls those feeds of information, and are they selectively curating it to deter actions that might affect the bottom line? Because yes, the answer is yes. But we are in a world on the verge of change, and it's important to thoughtfully engage because it increasingly seems like we have two clear paths in front of us. One of us takes us to a more ethical place where the income disparity is dramatically adjusted. The other is that we keep heading in this direction towards techno-feudalism. So basically, we need to consider what economic actions we can take and how we go about making those changes most effectively. Okay. So we're getting into my wheelhouse now with ethical business practices. Okay, so let's talk about what makes for an ethical business. This has become a huge topic of conversation in the past decade as politics in the United States became an increasingly polarizing force. So I grew up in a funeral family. Within death care, it's very important to maintain a safe space for people to engage with their own grief. And that means refraining from judgments about their opinions, politically or otherwise, as well as their personal belief systems, at least when we're at work. This expands into all other industries. I don't think a Republican baker should refuse to make a wedding cake for a gay couple, and that goes both ways. Now, clearly, there are limitations, and this presidency is clearly overstepping them. There are moments to refuse service, but I think it's important to be careful when assigning people or groups of people into this category. Because just as we saw with the AAM and BDS, it is important to focus our actions rather than diluting their power through overuse. If we aren't actually helping the cause, our actions are just a way of virtue signaling. But let's focus here on the philosophy of what is ambiguously good and turn toward what we can say is good and reasonable for society when it comes to business. So I tried to break these up into 4 main categories, starting with employee impact. This includes pay and benefits, job security, and community support or giving back. For example, does the owner of this company make an unconscionably higher income compared to the average employee? Jeff Bezos earns effectively about $7.9 million per hour, whereas his warehouse employees earn between $15 and $22 per hour. That means he's making roughly 500,000 times the amount of his workers. Now, I'm a big supporter of income caps where the owner or owners of a company can only make so many times more the value of their lowest full-time employee. Even if that number were 1,000 or 10,000, that's still a monumental change from what we're dealing with right now. If your lowest waged full-time employee brings in $40,000 a year, your income would then cap at $40 million. That is still an incredible amount of money. But 500,000 times the average worker, that's criminal. Getting the government to back regulations that would impose limits or requirements for big business, however, is not what the government is going to do right now. Decent pay also means providing benefits or appropriate compensation when benefits are not available. And this includes career longevity, which includes things like job security and upward mobility. And with all of these suggestions, I would argue that any potential profit loss is offset by the gains. Financial gains, too. Longevity improves employee recruitment and retention. It improves performance, and then it improves your bottom line because your team feels valued rather than like an expendable servant. And it's not just about feeling good about yourself at the end of the day, but that's nice, too. Businesses can see greater success by approaching things from an ethical model. So we have to include environmental impact. Once again, I don't want to browbeat you on a topic we're probably all familiar with. Save the environment, greener products for a better world, reduce waste and toxicity. There are very few things I hate more than ad nauseum conversations about everything wrong in the world today amongst a group of people who share the same beliefs. It is important to stay up to date, but these cyclical conversations get a little, let's say, redundant. I would also use self-congratulatory or asinine. So we're gonna skip past the bits about why we actually wanna help the environment and get right to the good stuff with how do we help the environment? Once again, as consumers, we have to tip the balance towards the companies that are already doing the right thing. We have to change our spending habits to reflect our values, and a company that is going to operate at a detriment to the environment might not be a company we want to reduce, that might be a company we want to reduce our reliance on until they either reduce or eliminate their negative environmental impact, or we as a group find better options for meeting those consumer needs. So don't tell me what you read in the newspaper today. I have been obsessively reading the news since I was in grade school. There probably should have been an adult present. I'd much rather hear about what shifts we can make in our own lives to echo change in the world around us. Corporations are ridiculously good at greenwashing their business practices. Let's stick with recycling as our example. How many folks have seen the little numbers on plastic containers? The real reason the number is there is to distance the companies that sell products in plastic from the responsibility of adding to plastic waste. I looked it up. So plastics 1 and 2 are generally accepted. 3 through 7, not so much. And you'd be really hard-pressed to find anybody who's going to accept 3, 6, or 7. 6 is styrofoam, by the way. So you'll see those little numbers on plastic, 1 through 7. But only 2 of those groups can be recycled in most places. So why not just have a recycling symbol on the plastic that can be recycled and not the other ones? Displace ownership of responsibility. Yes, this giant corporation is not at fault for plastic use. They put a recycling symbol on all their products. It is either the fault of the consumer or the government for not having a recycling option available for, let's say, styrofoam, which you cannot recycle styrofoam. Like the idea of the company using a material other than styrofoam is somehow an absurdity that can't even enter the conversation. It's not the company producing the plastic waste by refusing to choose more environmentally friendly packaging. It is the consumer's fault for not choosing the hippie version of laundry detergent with packaging made from the recycled feathers of free-range birds. And it always, always, always smells like lavender or patchouli or both. And if it's not the fault of the consumer, it's the fault of the government for not expanding local recycling programs or having more regulations. Everyone can point somewhere else when we pause to ask why this isn't working. So the consumer demands recycled products or recyclable packaging. The corporation then points to the city and says, they don't take that number of plastic, tell them to change. The community or their representatives make those same demands. And the corporation points to the individual and says, they can choose different products if they're really concerned about the environment. As long as corporations can shuffle responsibility for their misdeeds, they will, and the government will allow it. After all, protecting the economy in late-stage capitalism is all about protecting the largest corporations that have often achieved that status by finding ways to shuffle capital from the less fortunate masses to an elite and powerful few. Which brings us to economic impact. So in addition to an environmental footprint, large corporations leave an economic footprint. Walmart, for example, is a large corporation you'll find all over the country, all over. I remember when a Walmart would get like a small town would get a Walmart and everybody would be excited because they're celebrating an increased level of convenience, accessibility, and affordability. These folks often do not realize that on average, when a Walmart shows up in a suburban or rural area, the poverty increases by an estimated 6%. In an article for The Atlantic, Roger Karma said new research shows the cost Walmart imposes in the form of not only lower earnings, but also higher unemployment in the wider community outweigh the savings it provides shoppers. Furthermore, Walmart's low-wage workers cost U.S. taxpayers an estimated $6.2 billion in public assistance, including food stamps, Medicaid, and subsidized housing, according to a report published by Americans for Tax Fairness. And just for reference, Yahoo Finance reported that Walmart made $611 billion last year, or $1.7 billion a day. That means in less than a week, they could make up the cost to taxpayers for the government assistance programs required to sustain their own employees. That's wild to me. And I think most of us, everybody would agree. Companies that pay fair and living wages, that give back to the communities that support them, and don't use their economic stature to do harm to the world or increase economic divides can have a positive impact on the world, just as companies who refuse to do these very basic things are having a very negative impact, an economic impact. So, I don't know why it says 1, this is a 4. That brings us to this one, transparency. How do we know if businesses are doing the right thing? This is the answer. Now, whether people want to be living in the post-privacy era or not, it doesn't really matter anymore. We have arrived. A lot of information that should be transparent is actually already transparent. But creating better ways of accessing and evaluating this data, I think, would be a great step towards a more transparent and ethical business practice model. Of course, transparency only equates to better practices when we use that information to better evaluate who we want to do business with and who we do not want to do business with. We can look it up right now and find out what a large corporation is doing in terms of economic impact or environmental impact, how they treat their employees, and so on. But what good is that information if we're not using it? So Nilda Mesa, the director of, and I'm going to get this right, Urban Sustainability and Equity Planning Program at the Earth's Institute Center for Sustainable Urban Development, said if there is not a market for the recycled material, then the numbers do not work for these facilities as well as cities. as they need to sell the materials to recoup the cost of collection and transportation. And even then, it's typically only a portion of the cost. So we have to think about that sentence again. If there is not a market for the recycled materials, then the numbers do not work. It's business, plain and simple. And the thing is, recycling can be profitable. Prior to 2018, when China stopped accepting American trash, some of the municipalities were actually making money selling recyclables. In 2017, the city of Stamford, Connecticut, made $95,000 selling recyclables. But in 2018, that same program cost them $700,000 to have recyclables removed. If it's not lucrative, cities won't budget for it and to continue their recycling programs. And as we've seen time and again, most often it's just going to go to a landfill. I would then ask, how do we make it worthwhile? Well, at this stage in capitalism, we as consumers must create the economic demand. Okay, so we're going to talk about something here that I like to call the cozy revolution. Now, I'm not saying it's a good name. I'm just saying I can't think of one better. And it really does fit with what I'm about to describe. If you've been paying attention to the zeitgeist, there seems to be an increased momentum towards a slower life. You'll see it online with kids talking about cottagecore. Now, I'm a geriatric millennial, so we're all building retirement plans where where we live on communes with our friends when we retire. COVID and the quarantine that followed unintentionally created this massive interest in being at home, at doing DIY projects and crafts. I mean, how many people tried making bread for the first time? My brother's a sourdough master, by the way. It's up to us to make the changes that signal to corporations that now is the time to change. Only when we start taking baby steps in the direction of a better tomorrow will corporations begin to see their own profitability delineate with each new person who joins the cozy revolution. Just like Emma Goldman set her boundary, I have my own. I don't like camping, but I learned I enjoy looming. That was unexpected. I enjoy a nice embroidery project like I'm living in a Jane Austen novel. I still hate cooking, but we found out my husband enjoys it. Sometimes if cooking is enough like a craft, like I can get involved, like when we make pasta at home. For me, the first step to shift my spending from problematic companies towards better options when they are available. Nothing too crazy. Do we still occasionally purchase things from Amazon? Sure. But not if we can avoid it in a reasonable way, and we turned off Prime. Most of our Amazon spending has been chipped away at by this point. But once again, that was a process. Now, I still use Walmart Pharmacy, but I usually get groceries or run errands auxiliary to that Walmart Pharmacy trip because there are other businesses I'd rather support. Do I get down on myself if I need to pick up milk when I run in? No. The thing is, we have plenty of examples of consumers using their dollars to change companies' behavior, or even entire countries' behavior, like we saw in South Africa with the anti-apartheid movement. There's even a good example about Walmart. So as more and more consumers became interested in organic products, they created a demand that Walmart took note of. Then Walmart started making shifts in their spending to bring in more organic foods. When Walmart started buying organic food from these small producers in the United States, it led to a boom in the industry. Finally, small organic farms were starting to see a good profit because Walmart became their client. That strengthened the food supply as well as people's access to healthy organic food. If consumers become interested in something and their purchasing reflects that, big things can happen. And I think, once again, by accident and design, we are constantly fed a deluge of information intent on reinforcing the idea that the changes we make don't mean anything, and the world's going to keep barreling towards this inevitable whatever, so don't even bother making changes. But there are countless examples of companies responding to the demands of their customers and incidentally making the world a little bit better. So I know a lot of us feel like the world is on a precipice. For me and for other friends I've spoken to, it definitely feels like we're teetering right on the brink of something catastrophic or some major shift. Most of us struggle to even find the hope that maybe we could, maybe might, maybe be able to move towards something better. Last time I was here, I talked about the ethics of optimism and some ways we can work on our own worldview to create that hope. Now I'd like to talk about how we use that hope for cultivating change in the world around us. So let's turn back to the BDS. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. If you need to move the needle with laser-like precision, focused boycotts are a great way to go. Think about Tesla. How quickly did that company go from one of the most financially lucrative operations for investors to a position where people couldn't dump their stock or sell their cars fast enough? Honestly, I'm glad to know a Nazi salute still pushed people into doing the right thing. Whoa. Something where doing the right thing outweighs convenience or complacency. Then we have divestment. Remove unethical companies from your investment portfolio. Need to buy a car? Explore your options. Make sure the things that we're talking about are on your questionnaire. What is your gas mileage and where can I find your green report? Ready to buy a house or refinance? Look for lenders with ethical models. They are out there. Even just exploring what banks outside of the big four have available can prove better for the world and for your pocketbook. Who holds your checking account, your savings, even your retirement? This is where divestment comes into play. But if you were to decide today that you're making this incredible shift and everything about your life is going to change immediately because you're no longer buying things online, you're no longer going on social media, you're divesting from big business and moving all of your accounts first thing tomorrow, you will immediately be overwhelmed by how many small things still need to be addressed in order to bring all of your spending into alignment with your values. And that will immediately be followed by a sense of futility of existential proportions. That's why attempts on the left are often crippled before they even get to the starting line. We want to take action, but the first step doesn't complete the journey, so it stands still. That is why I'm proposing a cozy revolution, a meandering pathway that accounts for unexpected twists and turns without feeling like you've lost your way. You might just want to start with some ideas based on what works for you. Maybe even throw a couple of gimmies on the list just to make yourself feel good about how far you've come. So, maybe I'll start with non-toxic toys. No extra plastic waste, no lead, no questionable dyes. I'll buy little wooden trains and dolls made from recycled materials. Easy peasy, because I don't have kids. So that means shifting gears on about 6 to 12 presents I buy for children every year. Big change? No, but it still counts. Lots of parents are choosing to give their kids experiences rather than actual presents now. That's cool too. Now, I'll tell you, my weak point is fast fashion. I try to shop responsibly, but when it comes to seeking out plus-size retailers, we're dealing with an extra challenge. Rather than eliminating spending in this one arena, I started by bringing down my annual spending by 50%, and now I'm down 80%, less than I have in years past. I'm also being more responsible in the way that I take care of my clothes to make them last longer. And that is also the argument I use when anybody suggests I get rid of an ancient t-shirt that I love dearly. No. I cannot get rid of this ratty old t-shirt for the betterment of the world. Shifting away from larger financial institutions was easier in some ways for me because I own a local business, and I've often found better opportunities when I need funding through smaller or local institutions. But our credit cards have been tied up with banks like Chase or Citibank. Even when you're looking for a credit card outside the Big Four, you often find that they are still backed or managed by those same companies. So we move our bank accounts and leave our credit cards for the time being while we focus on other shifts or continue to explore other options without feeling like everything needs to change immediately. We are establishing a trend, and it gets us enough ahead. So reducing consumer waste and spending is something that I feel most Americans can do, if they look for the opportunities in their day-to-day life. I've held off on using this as an example, but I'm going to talk about it right now. And that's the place we're creating called Starlight Memorial Park. Like I said, I work in death care, in the funeral industry, as it's more commonly referred to, but I'm working on that because I, like others in the field, see the need to resituate care at the center of death care, not industry, because the funeral industry, as it currently stands, is focused more on capitalizing on people in the worst moments of their life to ensure maximum profitability. The funeral industry teaches you that you want clients in a place of high emotional awareness when they're making end-of-life decisions for loved ones. This is the last thing you'll do for your mother. Don't you want to see your father one more time? Never mind that preparing a body for viewing can cost thousands of dollars for stacked services that most families cannot afford. I was just at a conference in January, and they start this 3-day event with something called the Wheel of Objections. What objections do people in grief raise when they're dealing with death care? Of course, the first objection was, my family can't afford this. And how are we conditioned to respond? Here's a clue. We don't say, let's look at more affordable options. We're prompted to say, we partner with lenders to get families the services they need. Average funeral costs in this country land between $7,000 and $12,000, but the average American doesn't have $500 in savings. You do the math. So my company offers a more affordable, environmental, and accessible way to get dignified death care. We decided to open Starlight as a way to offer our own products to our own community. Generally speaking, as a business, we partner with nonprofits to help them provide memorialization options to their community that will then create an endowment for the institutions we work with, while also helping their communities gain access to more affordable care. I think it's pretty nifty. Starlight was intended to give us that next step forward in our own cozy revolution. Of course, we didn't plan on acquiring the oldest inhabited home in the valley. The adobe home on the grounds, known as Casa Chavez, was completed in 1886. We were the only people interested in purchasing the land that did not plan on raising the property to put in a parking lot or box-top store. Of course, I didn't realize that cesspools were not a metaphor in the 1800s. But I'm still married, so I guess things are working out okay so far. The home itself is part of a nearly eradicated history of early settlers here in Tempe. It is one of 2 remaining examples of San Pablo-style architecture. If you haven't heard of San Pablo, that's because ASU eradicated the community by claiming eminent domain to expand its campus. But you can come by for a historic tour at some point soon. I'll tell you about it then. What I'm trying to say is that this undertaking quickly shifted from a pet project of do the right thing into a much larger endeavor with complicated ethical decisions very quickly. We had to decide whether or not we were going to run away or run with it. And most of the time, I feel good about our decision. And like I said, still married. I have a very understanding husband who loves and supports me even when I say something stupid, like let's spend all our money and any money we might ever make on dirt. Important dirt, but still dirt. And in late capitalism, where the deck is stacked against small business and there aren't enough social guardrails to protect all the other people from financial ruin, it can be scary at times. But we have a dream of a better tomorrow. So, we have a cremation-only cemetery that offers more affordable and environmental death care options. But we're also transitioning the property into a community center and event space. So we offer things like classes and workshops, music and cultural events, even a coffee shop with a solarium where people can go and sit and chat or read or just mellow out in a beautiful historic space. That feels magical simply because it was able to survive all of the changes happening around it. Inside the adobe, we've opened a shop and refillery. A refillery is a place where you can go in and refill containers with sundry items and household goods. We have household cleansers, personal cleansers like shampoo and conditioner, even cooking oil. We do sell jars and bottles, but we never look down on a spaghetti jar if somebody wants to bring in their own containers. All of our products are ethically sourced from US-based companies, so we're supporting good businesses that have a positive impact of their own accord. But they also help by reducing our reliance on big businesses, increasing sustainability while decreasing consumer waste. And honestly, there's some really cute jars and bottles because this is, after all, a cozy revolution. The rest of the things in our store are procured through the framework of our value system. There are things that we make on site. Oftentimes, if we make it on site, we're going to offer a class or workshop that teaches you how to make it too, because there's no gatekeeping in the future that I look forward to. We source goods from waste, meaning they were likely on their way to a landfill, and we were able to purchase them either on auction or by pallet, so we can salvage whatever possible and then offer that to our customers. We also carry goods from local artisans and artists. We like to joke it's where you can get married or buried. But it's also a space that artists in the community can use to test out their wily ideas, a place where independent care practitioners can offer service. Folks from the community can come down and take part in our bi-monthly book brunch or some of our classes without charge because we need to have a sense of community within our community. We even offer curated cultural events like our annual Shakespeare in the Garden production. And this year, by the way, we're doing The Tempest. But Starlight is a culmination of the ideas that I have for a better future. But it is very much a work in progress because we are all a work in progress. Doing everything you can means doing everything you can with the time and resources available to you. That's the catch. A lot of conversations about modernity addressed the spectrums that we all exist on, that we were raised to believe were actually binaries: neurodiversity, sexuality. The human race is learning that it is not a matter of 0 or 1, but the infinite points between those two numbers. Same goes for the statement, do better. We should all constantly be striving to do better. And when we do better, we celebrate that moment and then push the needle a little further out. There is no arriving. You can always find more room to grow. So if we look at how we can bring about our own cozy revolution, we begin to find the opportunities for small acts because small acts echo. So, different folks show up at the garden for different reasons. Some are seeking comfort in grief. Some are looking for a way to connect with people in the world around them, something that has been slowly slipping away from us as a society over the past several decades. Some people just want to pick fruit or have a picnic in the garden. Some are looking for an opportunity to create or share their art. Whatever brings them into that space can vary, but a lot of visitors begin to see those other opportunities for small shifts in their life and their spending habits. If we want to stop late-stage capitalism from creating an age of techno-feudalism, we need to look for ways of acting smaller, of giving less to corporations, of shifting our spending and reducing consumer waste, because if we want to hit them in the economy, that means changing the rules for how we as consumers are willing to engage within that economy. At this point in human history, big media and big business are run by the same people. Whether or not they are aimed at the left or the right does not matter, because both sides are ultimately trying to deliver the same message. The things you do don't matter. Anything you change in your life doesn't amount to any real change in the world around you. That the government and world leaders need to enact rules or regulations to bring about any change. But that will not happen in state monopoly capitalism, late-stage capitalism. Instead, we have to all be agents of change. And that starts with understanding that it is not a sprint, it is not a marathon, it is a hobbit's journey towards a cozy revolution. Economic acts can change economic systems. So start imagining a better future. It's better to do it in detail, and then start mapping out some of those little steps that you can start making to wield your spending like a weapon in defense of smaller, ethical companies by slicing away at the support for those looming corporate entities and evil billionaires. It's time to hit them in the economy. It's time for a cozy revolution filled with potlucks and crafts and sourdough bread and making friends and building community and shifting our spending habits to align with our personal philosophies. And this is how we should choose to engage in the world around us. Thank you.
So we do have time for questions. So raise your hand, and I'll try to get to you as soon as I see you.
I just have a quick comment on recycling programs. I'm a retired civil engineer, and I've taken a tour of the City of Phoenix Recycling Center. It's a fascinating place, and I'd just like to make two comments about that. One is people who throw trash out into their recycling bins apparently cannot be trained to differentiate between recyclables and non-recyclables because they deal with contaminated loads all the time. And the second is, if you're going to recycle anything, aluminum cans and steel, those are money makers, and they are very easy to remove from the waste stream. So don't give up on those. But the rest of it, you're right. They're struggling to find markets for some of the recycled materials. But aluminum and steel, do it.
That's one of the things, the evaluate and reevaluate is such a crucial component of the conversation. And something like, you're obviously informed about what's happening here in town, providing that information when we're having those conversations about what we're doing, can leverage that change. Some people who might not be recycling might say, man, I go through a lot of bubble water. Of course, no, I think that's great, thank you.
Great presentation. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Like so many lefties in the last year, I've sort of gotten enamored by the idea that Gavin Newsom might have a chance at being president. However, in the last few months, I've read some articles and I heard a story on NPR that basically said that Newsom is really no friend of the left, and he could be really worse than a lot of the other people that we should be supporting right now. What are your thoughts on that, please? Thank you again.
Once again, I obviously have feelings about this particular administration because we are off the rails. When it comes to the federal level of politics, because we are in that phase of late stage capitalism, oftentimes they are not going to be, even if they're on the platform of I'm going to be making these changes, that is not the case. There are all of these checks and balances that usually work. And so we can't look to the government to enact changes for us. If it's not Gavin Newsom and someone else steps into that position, we have to assume if they have the money to run for presidency that they are in the pockets of very large corporations. But I've worked a lot with local government recently, this past year or two. There are some ways that we as voters, that we as individuals can engage in our own community with local politicians to see change happen here, and then that models change for other communities. When we were setting up the garden here, I needed additional zoning options that were not on the books, but I was able to look to other cities to see what they were doing. And then I was able to bring that and set a precedent for Tempe to show them that it is in other places and it is working. And then we got those laws added to the books.
We have a question from online. Do you have any suggestions for identifying not only companies we should consider boycotting based on our specific values or goals, but also identifying ones we should boycott instead?
It's kind of a free-for-all right now. There's so many corporations that operate on a model of, sure, we're doing some bad, but we have to. Amazon, of course, Walmart, these are the big four banks. These are all great starting points. Even if it's not a matter of completely eliminating your spending in that region or on that company, if you begin to delineate your purchases to other areas, there is that meta statistic that starts. If one person's doing it, 10 people are doing it, then 100 people are doing it. If 100 people are shifting away $100 or $1,000 from these corporations, then they're starting to see that slowly this money is not, they're not maximizing their profit by not acknowledging what their consumers want.
Two things. First, I just wanted to share a story. I have a friend who was born east of the Berlin Wall, and she was 14 years old when the Berlin Wall came down. And she said they had learned to live without money in East Berlin. They bartered, they helped each other, they exchanged goods and exchanged services, and got along very well without money. And then the wall came down, and they were so excited they were going to get to go to West Berlin, and they flooded into the capitalist area, and there was a depression that set in. They had a very serious depression because they were missing what they had had when they were poor. And that really stuck with me, obviously. The other thing is your park is cremation only, and cremation has a negative impact on the environment. And the only ethical option that I have seen is the composting or Become a Tree program. And I want to catch you privately later and try to get some information on that. And I understand why you could not do that in Tempe, because in about 15 funerals you would run out of land.
Oh,
But
we're doing it in Tempe.
composting?
Oh, no, composting we are not doing.
Right.
So composting is wonderful. Green burial options are available. Oftentimes they are very expensive. We help everybody do planning, like non-obligation, and we mean it. We help everybody find what they're looking for. Now, the funny thing is with cremation, by comparison to in-ground burial, is that it is a more environmental option, but you are correct that it puts out toxins and into the environment. But there's actually filtration systems that are available. There's aquamation, which is a water-based type of cremation. Those are much better for the environment than the crematoriums that we are dealing with right now, and we're starting to see them pop up in different areas. Arizona now allows for aquamation or water cremation. That's an option available to people. We place urns of people who have been through aquamation because we don't do cremation on site. But there are even, like I said, there are filtration options that are available. But until enough people are saying, we're not going to choose this unless we have this option, or people are seeing business from their local community shift over to Gilbert or Phoenix or something like that because they offer those things, then companies start to adopt those practices.
Okay. So first thing, I appreciate the comment about Walmart, how you said it, you mentioned the whole organic thing, because when you said that, the thought that occurred to me was, what's the use of this info if there aren't like better places to shop? But, I liked your example. And when it comes to the frustrating thing is when it comes to, say, a place like Amazon, it gets very frustrating because, I might need something and I can only find it at Amazon.
Totally.
That's very, very frustrating. But essentially, I tend to just not shop there very often. That's my way of dealing with that. Just try not to shop there very often. And then the last thing is also I appreciate the clarification on the whole recycling numbers thing, because that is also something that's been very confusing to me. Just recycling in general, knowing what to recycle, and then these numbers come up. I'm all like, what the heck does this mean? And blah. So I appreciate that. What I've decided to do is that kind of follow the whole 3R thing: reduce, reuse, recycle. I just try to reduce. And try to reduce, try to reuse. Like I found a candle shop, and I'll clean out the candle jars and give my candle jars to them. just simple things like that, or when it comes to like trash bags, I'm thinking about doing like a reusable trash bag. Just little things like that.
No,
And,
these are some great points that you're bringing up, and
Yeah.
and I think it really goes back to that idea of, you know, I'll still get certain things on Amazon. You know, if we're creating blanket statements, I will never do this, I am not going to do this. If we're going to set it up that we're so strident with ourselves that we do not have any space, you know, to continue growing, that becomes a problem in of itself. That's part of the reason that I think so many people feel like what they're doing is not enough, and then it kind of starts moving in the other direction. Well, I still have to get some things on Amazon. Maybe I'll get, you know, more things. That just kind of spirals out from there. But finding those options, the candle store is great. You know, even something like refilling soap containers. Americans create about 4.5 pounds of trash a day. And so if we're able to even start to bring down our own number, those small changes do have a larger ramifications when we start doing it as a community, and starting the conversations about it are, I think, the right place to begin.
And the last comment I want to make is, like, I've been there, just getting to a point of when you feeling very hopeless, thinking about these issues, and then just kind of getting to a place of just being very hopeless and just, yeah.
I think a lot of us
but
feel
I
that a
just-
lot.
Yeah, but I by implementing these particular changes that I have, it's just my small way of, you know, combating that.
No, I think that's great. I think that's kind of what we're all looking to do. And things are structured in a way to kind of strip us of that hope, so we feel less capable of making change. We feel more ineffectual.
Hi, thank you so much. So one example that I've seen of boycotts working has been Target. And it's really exciting because they kind of capitulated on day one. And I'm figuring that you're paying way more attention to this than I am. Do you have any that make you really excited?
You know, it's the I don't want to take this the other direction, but, you know, Target, I worked in their financial division when I was in graduate school. It has a great model. They try very hard to be very active in society, but they respond so quickly to consumer demands that oftentimes it's not a well thought out or considered practice. So they're going to say, oh, well, people don't want this, pivot as quick as you can. And then there's going to be a reactionary response to whatever they just did. There's so much back and forth sometimes with these larger corporations. We can see that they're trying to respond, but there's not sustained action. So if people are, rather than all of a sudden at that moment doing a boycott that's going to last, you know, this week I'm not shopping at Target, that's a way to help get your voice heard. But the sustained delineation of spending at these corporations who are going to be making decisions we don't agree with or enforcing an economy that we don't align with, I think that's why we need to start shifting in a smaller but longer term sense. So targeted action, always great to get your voice heard. But what we see is they'll go back to a different model or try something else that consumers are not going to agree with. And then there's the backlash, the response, and then things continue on the norm. So small, steady change.
We got one more online. This is from one of our board members, Michelle, and she's zooming in. We went over the boycotting spot, but what about a boycott? What would be what are good companies we should be buying from?
Okay, so that's fun. That gets tricky. There are good companies out there, and for some reason only Patagonia is coming to mind, but they sold anyway. But for example, in our store, we bring in smaller companies. We have all of our personal cleansers are made by a company called Mama Suds. If you're looking for something that's like an ethical product, that's a great jumping off point for a conversation. When you're talking to friends, rather than discussing the thing that makes you upset about the news that you're all upset about, start saying, hey, I found this great company that makes shampoo and cleanser and all of this, and they're here, US-based, non-toxic, and refillable. So there are so many of these small avenues. Even going to your local farmers markets, you'll find people who are selling from local farms, but you'll also find local artisans or merchants who are vending products there that either they make or they source that are more aligned with our ethical vision.
We have time for one final question, but before we take it, are you able to stick around for a little bit in case
Sure.
people have? Okay, great.
Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, as you're talking, it sounds very much like a harm reduction model, which has been shown really efficacious for people like with addictions. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, gosh, as an American, I'm addicted to convenience. And I really appreciate that. I also was thinking that when one is overwhelmed by the chaos of regular life, it becomes really easy to get the screw-its, frankly, and think, okay, this isn't going to make a difference. So I'm just curious, do you know if there's any studies about like the stage of change model? In psychology, we talk a lot about how if you have an intervention, depending upon what stage of change somebody is in, like I would assume many of us here are in action stage because we got off our butts to come here today. And so people here might be more apt to take some of those actions, whereas my husband, who is still at home right now, I would need to change my intervention with him to make change because he's not yet as on board. So I'm just curious, do you know if like, is there research happening right now to help with these kinds of economic changes that match the intervention to what stage of change people are in? Does that make sense?
That's a fascinating question, and one I'm probably going to spend the rest of the day with. You know, one of the things that is especially challenging right now is the way that our ineffectualness is reinforced. So a lot of people are getting that messaging, you know, responding to that messaging because it is pervasive. It is the norm. And so convenience clearly outshadows what other people would consider virtue signaling because it's not having the change that you want it to have. But harm reduction is a great comparison, and finding those ways of kind of moving in a direction. Cornel West says we're either educating allies or alienating enemies. And I think walking a very hard line oftentimes ends up creating more alienated individuals who can't align themselves with that message. We're seeing that right now as people are moving away from the MAGA movement or supporting the current presidency. There's a lot of backlash where they feel like they're not getting accepted into, you know, with the rest of us. And that is actually impacting how people are shifting their political views, is because they experience this backlash and then they revert to sort of where they were, like, oh, well, this is not going to work for me. Same thing with convenience. It might be more convenient to do certain things, but when we're choosing our battles, when we're starting to move in a direction, this week I'll recycle all my metals. Next week I'll make sure that I'm, you know, not purchasing anything from Target, perhaps. There are accessible ways, accessible avenues, but I think a lot of times people feel like they're really being pushed into a direction that is going to make them change their life in very dramatic ways and not result in a lot of change. But when we're making those small changes, it's kind of like turning on the hot water with the lobster inside. It just kind of happens slowly, and you don't. Let's try and use a more positive analogy when we think back to this conversation.